My name is Olivia Sinclair, and I was 32 years old the morning my mother rang my doorbell for the first time in 14 years. She stood on my porch holding a leather folder, smiled like we'd had lunch the Tuesday before, and quoted the price of my own house at me the way you'd read a bill out loud. $170,000. That's what's fair, Libby. I had never given my mom this address. I had never given her my phone number, my town, or my name on a mailbox. She had all of it anyway. By the end of that year, my mother would put a price on raising me. A judge would read her handwriting out loud in open court, and my father, the quiet one, the harmless one, would do something on the courthouse steps that not even my mother saw coming. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This channel is where women tell the family stories they used to only whisper, slow, steady, and all the way to the end. If these stories find you at the right time, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. Now let me take you back to that Saturday morning in March, and the sound of a doorbell I never gave anyone the right to ring. She looked good. That was the first thing I noticed, and I hated that I noticed. Carol Sinclair, 58 years old, hair set, coat pressed, standing on my porch in Cedar Run, Ohio, 2 hours from the town I'd escaped. I kept the screen door latched between us. Some part of me had rehearsed this moment for 14 years, and every version of me was smarter than the version who opens the door. "Livy," she said, warm as a bank teller at closing time. "You look thin. Is that stress? Small businesses will do that." I asked how she found me. She laughed like the question was adorable. "Found you, honey. I never lost you. Sinclair Ledger Services, cute name. You did an ad last fall with that bakery girl, the one with the sleeve tattoos. And you've got a grey cat now. It sits in the front window." My mouth went dry. She kept going. "Pleasant as a weather report. You bought this place in March 3 years ago. County website. Honey, it's all public. I keep up. 14 years of unlisted numbers, of paying rent in other people's names, of checking the parking lot before I got out of my car." She had been watching over me the entire time, the way a lender watches collateral. She patted the leather folder against her palm twice, soft as a heartbeat. "I didn't drive 2 hours to fight," she said. "I came with an offer, a fair one, family fare." Behind her at the curb, my father's old blue truck sat idling with a shape hunched behind the wheel that did not wave and did not look at me. Whatever was in that folder, they had planned it together. To explain what was in that folder, I have to take you back to Marion, Ohio, and a spiral notebook with a green cover that lived on top of our refrigerator. My mother called it the family book. It came down when money moved, which was always. New sneakers for gym class went in the book. A field trip to the state capitol went in the book with the sack lunch itemized separately. When I was 14 and got my first job scooping ice cream at Tasty Corner, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table and explained gently, like a benefits coordinator, that I was old enough now to contribute. Room and board, she called it. $40 a week in an envelope due Fridays. She wrote a receipt for every envelope in that green notebook, date and amount in handwriting so neat it looked printed. I used to believe every family had a book like that. Then I ate dinner at a friend's house and nobody handed me an invoice, and something in my stomach shifted sideways and never quite shifted back. The only place the math stopped was my grandmother June's kitchen, 3 streets over, where the tea was too sweet and nothing cost anything. She'd pour me a cup from her good china and say, "You're not a Bill Junebug, you're a girl." I didn't understand until years later why she said it like an apology. My mother wasn't cruel the way movies show. She never hit me. She never screamed. She just kept the ledger patiently, line after line, year after year, the way other mothers keep photo albums. And here is the question I would carry all the way into a courtroom. What kind of life teaches a woman to do that? The spring I turned 18, my mother laid out my future at that same kitchen table, the green book open beside her like scripture. I would stay home. I would work full-time. The night shift paid better. My paychecks would go toward what she called the raising balance, 18 years of food, clothes, heat, and patience, all of it lovingly documented. College was, in her words, a luxury item, and luxury items were for people with a zero balance. I answered no. It was the first flat no of my life, and it landed in that kitchen like a dropped plate. She didn't yell, she recalculated. She explained that ungrateful girls who walk away from family debts find out fast what the world charges for the same services. And my father, my quiet father, Raymond Sinclair, who could fix any machine in the plant and couldn't look his own wife in the eye, stood in the doorway with his coffee and said the sentence that would follow me for 14 years. Just give her what she wants, Livy. It's easier. That night, I packed 2 duffel bags. I took my work shoes, my birth certificate, and the $1,900 I'd hidden in a tampon box. Because even at 18, I realized my privacy had a search history. I walked to the depot in the dark and took the first bus heading anywhere. And I watched Marion slide past the window like a town I'd only read about. I want to be honest with you about what I sensed, because it wasn't triumph. It was arithmetic. I had done the math my mother taught me, and I had concluded I could not afford to be her daughter. It took 14 years to build a life she couldn't touch. I believed I had. Here's the part of the story where I'm supposed to say, I struggled and I did, but I'll spare you the violin. I waited tables at a diner off Route 9 and stocked shelves overnight at a grocery store. Sometimes both in the same 24 hours. I slept in a rented room where the radiator had 2 settings, often Florida. At 20, I started night classes at the community college. At 22, I had an associate degree in accounting and a discovery about myself. I'm freakishly good at making numbers tell the truth. Give me a shoebox of crumpled receipts and a terrified small business owner, and in a week I'll hand back order. An order is just another word for peace. At 26, I hung out my own shingle, Sinclair Ledger Services, which, yes, is me spitting into the wind, taking the word my mother ruined and making it pay my bills. I did the books for a transmission shop, a bakery, 2 HVAC crews, a dog groomer with a cash drawer like a crime scene. The bakery was Rachel's. She became the sister I didn't get issued, and I kept everything. Every lease, every utility bill, every bank statement from the month I turned 18, filed by year in folders with typed labels. Rachel teased me about it once, calling it my doomsday library. I explained it was a professional habit. That was a lie I believed. The truth, and it took a courtroom to teach me, is that girls who grow up itemized never stop preparing for an audit. I alphabetize my spice rack. I keep gas receipts from cars I no longer own. It looks like discipline. Hold that thought, because every page of that filing habit was about to matter more than I could have priced. My grandmother June found me when I was 25, and I say I found it hard. She'd had my number the whole time. She'd just been waiting until calling me wouldn't cost me anything at home. After that, we had 2 years of Sunday phone calls. She'd tell me about her tomatoes and her church ladies. And she'd ask about my clients like they were characters in her stories, twice near the end. She said something strange. She said, I did it to your mother too, June Bug. I just paid differently. I didn't push. I wish I had. She died the spring I was 27, 81 years old, in her sleep with the radio on. At the funeral, my mother hugged everyone in the receiving line with the exact same duration. And across the casket, I caught her looking at me the way you look at a storage unit you've been paying on for years, not with longing, with inventory. 2 weeks later, a bank officer called me. My grandmother had left a payable on death account, $20. 00 designated to one name, Olivia Sinclair. He mailed the paperwork with a sticky note in careful cursive saying she'd set the designation up 2 years earlier in person, sharp as an attack, and had asked him twice to make sure it would go directly to me. No probate, no detours, no family discussion. I sat on my apartment floor and held that letter for a long time. It was money, but it didn't feel like money. It felt like a door being quietly unlocked from the other side. 15 minutes after the funeral lunch in the church parking lot, my mother had asked me one question. Sweet as pie. What are you planning to do with the family's money? I didn't touch June's money for 2 years. It sat in its own account, and some months when a client paid late and my checking got skinny, I'd look at it the way you look at a lifeboat. Then the house on Marrold Lane came up for sale. A little brick ranch in Cedar Run with a bowed front window and a yard that got sun all day. $170,000. I was 29. I brought $34,000 to closing, June's 20 plus 14. I'd saved one boring, beautiful dollar at a time. I read every page of that closing packet, initialed like a surgeon. And when the title officer slid the deed across the table and said, "Congratulations," I had to excuse myself to the parking lot for a minute. And I'm not going to tell you what I did out there, but my mascara didn't survive it. The first night I slept on the living room floor because my bed hadn't arrived, and it was the best sleep of my adult life. In the spring, I planted marigolds along the walk because a house on Marigold Lane without marigolds is a bookkeeping error. I put June's teacup, the good china one, on the kitchen windowsill where the morning light could find it. For 3 years, that house held my whole quiet life. Work at the kitchen table, Rachel's day-old bread, the grey cat I hadn't planned on. I used to stand in the doorway some nights just looking at it all, thinking, paid in full, nobody's ledger mine. What I didn't think about was the county recorder website, where every deed is public, searchable, free, a love letter if the person reading it is built a certain way. So there she stood 3 years later, patting that leather folder on my porch. She opened it against her forearm like a waitress with a check tray and turned it to face me through the screen. The top page said, in bold type she'd sent it herself, Family Property Agreement. She had typed it at the library. I'd learn later, and it read like a ransom note edited by a church secretary. The offer was this. I would sell my parents the house on Marigold Lane for $170,000. Exactly what you paid Libby to the penny. Nobody's cheating you. They had already sold the house in Marion. My father had taken his pension early at a penalty, which she mentioned the way you'd mention a war wound. The house was worth about $235,000 by then, and we both knew it, and that was the point. The $65, Seals and difference, she explained patiently, was the raising balance. 18 years of room and board called due. You bought this with June's money, she said, and her voice dropped its warmth like a coat. And June's money was my money. That woman owed me a whole life, and she skipped over me to spite me, and I am done being skipped. I answered, no, just no. No essay attached, which for me was 14 years of therapy in a single breath. My mother looked at me for a moment, and then her face changed the way a screen changes when the power cuts. All the pleasantness was gone at once. We're not asking, Olivia, she said. We're collecting. She wedged the folder into the screen door and walked back to the truck. 30 days later, she called over her shoulder like a dentist's office, confirming an appointment. Let me stop here and ask you something, friend to friend. If a mother you hadn't seen in 14 years stood on your porch with a bill for your childhood, would you have opened that screen door? Tell me in the comments, because that morning, for about 3 seconds, I almost did. And if you've ever had to lock a door against your own family, hit subscribe because the rest of this story is for you. Here's what I did with the rest of that Saturday. And I'm telling you the boring parts on purpose, because the boring parts are what saved me. I photographed every page of her so-called agreement before I touched it with bare hands, then bagged it like leftovers. I wrote down the time she arrived, the time she left, what she said, what the truck looked like. Then I sat on my kitchen floor with the cat and shook for about 10 minutes. Because you can be organized and terrified at the same time. Ask any bookkeeper in April. Monday morning, I called 2 law firms in Dayton and hired the one that didn't promise me anything. Dana Reeves, Civil Litigation. A handshake like a stapler. She read my mother's document twice, set it down and said, this is a wish list, not a contract. No consideration, no signatures, no enforceable anything. Then she tapped the page and added the sentence I'd repeat to myself for months. But your mother believes it. That's the dangerous part. People who believe their own paperwork don't stop at the porch. Her instructions were simple. Don't answer calls from unknown numbers. Don't meet them alone anywhere ever. Every communication in writing. Everything saved. I explained about my filing habit, the folders by year, and she smiled for the first time in that meeting. Good. You may be the first client I've ever had who overdoes. On my way out, she asked one more question, casual as a coat check. Does anyone else in the family know your address? I stopped with my hand on the door, because the answer was my Aunt Sharon, my mother's little sister, who sent me a Christmas card every year, and who had never once been able to keep a secret from Carol Sinclair in her life. The campaign started before the 30 days were up. That's the thing nobody warns you about. The lawsuit is the second front. The first front is the story, and my mother had a 14-year head start on the story. Aunt Sharon called me crying on a Tuesday night, and she wasn't acting. That's what made it awful. How could you, Libby? Your parents are old. They sold their house because they thought she caught herself, because they had nowhere to go, and you're sitting in a big house all alone. I asked her quietly what exactly my mother had told her, Sharon said Carol had shown the family a folder of receipts of everything they'd sacrificed and had explained that I'd taken Grandma June's money. Money that was meant for the family and hidden from them while they aged. The prayer chain at their church in Marion added my parents by name and me too, the wayward daughter. Lord, soften her heart. Word travels down a county road faster than fiber optic. One of my HVAC clients, a good man with a Marion cousin, called that Friday. Apologetic, wretched, and pulled his account. Family stuff, he said. Too complicated. I want you to notice what I didn't do because it cost me something. I didn't post my side. I didn't call the cousins with my folder of evidence. Dana had said the courtroom is the only room where the truth gets a microphone, and anywhere else it's just two women yelling in a parking lot. So I logged it, date, time, what was said, what it cost, and I fed the cat, and I went to bed with my heart going like a dryer with a shoe in it. Monday. A certified letter arrived from a law office in Marion. The letterhead said Krebs and Associates, and the letter said in 3 paragraphs of rented thunder that my parents demanded conveyance of the Marold Lane property, an asset acquired with family resources within 14 days or litigation would follow. Dana read it out loud in her office with her glasses on the end of her nose, the way you'd read a middle schooler's essay. Acquired with family resources, she repeated. That's a legal theory the way a horoscope is a weather forecast. Her reply was 1 page. It said in lawyer no, and also keep your clients off her porch. Then she set down her pen and gave me the talk. I'd give anything to done. She said even a case with no legs walks for months. Answer discovery depositions. Motions. Her retainer was $5,000. I paid it out of the roof fund and I remember thinking, there goes the new shingles. The old ones will hold. Here's what I realized only later. And I want you to have it now because someone listening needs it. A meritless lawsuit isn't designed to win. It's designed to bleed every month. Staying alive costs the defendant money, sleep, and clients. And for a plaintiff like my mother, that's not a side effect. That is the product. Krebs built by the hour and didn't need to believe her. She didn't need to win the house. She needed me tired, broken, softened, so that one day I'd sign something just to make it stop. Dana called it what it was, a siege. And my mother, who once charged a 14-year-old rent in her own childhood bedroom, had always been very, very good at waiting out a siege. 31 days after the porch, a sheriff's deputy handed me an envelope on my own welcome mat, said, "Sorry, Mom," like he meant it, and drove off. Sinclair v. Sinclair, Wardell County Court of Common Pleas. My mother plaintiff. Me defendant. Count 1, unjust enrichment. Count 2, constructive trust. Count 3, promissory estoppel. A phrase that sounds like a disease horses get. And in a way it is. The complaint told a story where the $20,000 from June was family money I diverted by a scheming granddaughter, where I had verbally promised my parents a home in my house someday, and where the only just remedy was for the court to declare that they held an interest in Marigold Lane, and stapled behind it the piece that made my hands go cold, a notice of Liz pendants already recorded against my deed. Dana translated, It's a flag on your title, she said. While the case is alive, you can't sell, can't refinance, can't touch your own equity without their lawsuit riding along. It doesn't mean they're winning. It means they've parked a car across your driveway, and the tow truck takes months. I read that complaint at my kitchen table 3 times. The legal writing was Krebs, all elbows in Latin. But underneath the varnish, I could hear her voice in every paragraph. The bank teller warmth over the drop-forged steel. The arithmetic of a woman who had waited 14 years for the account to come due. We're not asking, we're collecting. On the last page, in the list of exhibits the plaintiff intended to rely upon, Item 1, stop my breath, Exhibit A, the family ledger. She was going to walk that green notebook into a court of law like it was proof. The copy of the ledger arrived on Thursday, scanned page by page, and I made the mistake of opening the file at lunch. There it was, the green cover, the neat columns. My whole childhood at retail. My mother had submitted it herself, voluntarily, as proof of what the complaint called a documented pattern of intrafamilial. In her mind, that notebook was her Bible and her bank statement in one. Proof she had done everything right. I scrolled on my laptop until the kitchen light changed and my coffee went cold. The first entry was dated the year I turned 1. Diapers, formula, clinic visit in that tidy printed hand with a running balance carried forward like I'd been born owing. Page after page, the sneakers, the field trip, sack lunch itemized, then the Friday envelopes, age 14 onward, $40 a week. Each one received and logged with a little checkmark of satisfaction. Room and board collected. I had to close the laptop for a while at that one. When I showed Dana, I expected a lawyer's poker face. Instead, she went quiet, turned pages, went quieter, and finally said the only sentence I ever heard her say softly. Olivia, I've been doing this almost 20 years, and I have never seen a plaintiff hand me their own cross-examination. She flagged the page where a child's babysitting money was applied against interest. My mother had at some point started charging interest, and she looked at me over her glasses and asked if I was ready for what a judge might do with this. I answered, I didn't know that was honest, because there was a version of this, where a courtroom full of strangers read that book and shrugged, and I'd been raised by the one woman who would. That night it rained the way Ohio means it in June, and I couldn't sleep. So I did the thing I do instead of falling apart. I went to the hall closet and brought out the banker's box. One box, brown cardboard, the kind that holds a fired man's desk plant in the movies, except mine held 14 years of me. Bank statements from the month I turned 18 forward, every deposit traceable to a pay stub with my name on it, the lease from the room with the bipolar radiator, tax returns, every year, every schedule. June's payable on death paperwork. The bank officer's sticky note is still attached. The complete closing file for Marrold Lane. Every page initial OS. And in a plastic sleeve at the bottom, the thing even Rachel didn't know I kept. A rubber-banded brick of receipts in my mother's handwriting. The Friday envelopes, aged 14 to 18, which I had taken from my room the night I left. Because some animal part of me already knew that someday I would need to prove what my childhood had caused. I spread it all across the kitchen table, and I sat there in the stormlight, and something in my chest turned over, slow like an engine catching. She wanted to fight with ledgers. Fine. I had been kept like a ledger, and I had survived into a woman who kept them better. I found a black marker and wrote on the end of the box in block letters, Sinclair View Sinclair, and set it by the door like a packed suitcase. There was a sentence sitting in my throat that night, one I hadn't earned yet and wasn't ready to say to her face. Love isn't alone. It would be almost a year before I answered it out loud, and when I did, it would be under oath in the worst room of my life. She had her book. I had every other piece of paper in the world. My deposition happened in a conference room at Krebs's office in Marion with bad coffee and a court reporter whose face I will love forever because it never moved. Krebs was a big, soft-voiced man who asked questions like he was helping you across the street. Isn't it true your family housed you for 18 years? Isn't it true you were supported? His favorite word, supported, through your childhood. Wouldn't you agree the money from your grandmother was family money? Dana had trained me for 2 full evenings, and her rule was 1 sentence long. Answer the question you were asked, not the movie he's making. So I did. Yes, I live there. Support is a word I wouldn't use. The account was payable on death to me by name. The bank has the records. 4 hours of that. My mother sat across the table the whole time in her church coat, dabbing at dry eyes with a folded tissue every time Cribbs said the word family. A performance so practiced it had a rhythm you could set music to. But here's the part that followed me home. To build his questions, Krebs kept referring to a stack of printouts, and they were my business's social media posts going back 6 years. The ad with Rachel, a photo of my office with the cat on the desk, a client thank you post from 4 November ago, annotated in the margin and handwriting I'd know anywhere. My mother had not simply looked me up when she wanted the house. She had been reading me for years, printing me out, filing me, watching over me. She'd say later with complete sincerity. On the drive home, I finally understood the flat feeling under my ribs. You can't be found if you were never lost, only watched. My mother's deposition was in October, and I attended because Dana said watching her answer under oath was worth more than any transcript. And Dana was right, but not the way either of us expected. For an hour, she performed for the court reporter. The sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the daughter who vanished without a word, tissue at the ready. Then Dana asked almost gently where the idea of a family raising balance came from, whether anyone had ever kept such a ledger on her, and my mother put the tissue down. What came out of her then didn't sound rehearsed. and that's the only reason I'm able to tell you this part with some pity in my mouth. She was 19, she said, when her father died and June's house got quiet and cold. She worked the register at the fabric store days and cleaned offices nights, and every payday she signed her check over to her mother at that same kind of kitchen table. She raised Sharon, packed Sharon's lunches, pressed Sharon's choir dresses. There was a nursing program in Columbus with her name on an acceptance letter, and June said next year. After we're caught up, there were 9 next year. I paid my mother back every cent of me, she said, and her chin was steady. But her hands were not. That's what a daughter is. I paid. And then at the end, my mother takes $20,000, my inheritance, my back pay, and she hands it over my head to the one person who never paid anybody anything. The room was very quiet. For one breath, I saw the 19-year-old at that cold table, and I realized my whole childhood as her invoice to a dead woman. Then Dana asked if she'd also charged interest on her daughter's babysitting money, and my mother said without blinking, "Money teachers." It was for her own good. The pity in my mouth dried up. On the way out, Dana said quietly, "Now I understand why you kept every receipt." By November, the family had sorted itself the way rock salt sorts on a shaking screen. Sharon delivered her ultimatum by phone on a Sunday voice roll. And for the record, I believe she loved me while she said it. "Drop your countersuit, Libby." There was no countersuit. There was me declining to hand over my house, but that's what Carol had named it. Drop it. Come to Thanksgiving and all of this goes away, or don't. And understand that every person at that table will only ever know you as the girl who put her own mother in a courtroom. I answered, "Aunt Sharon." She filed the lawsuit. There was a long pause, and then she said the saddest thing anyone said that whole year. "Honey, that's not how she tells it. And she's the one at the table." The cards stopped after that. Cousins I'd grown up with went quiet on me. My phone filled with unknown numbers I let ring against Dana's voicemail like waves on a jetty. And then on a Tuesday past midnight, one I answered, half asleep. No caller ID, silence breath, and then my father's voice, low, roughened, closer to the phone than he ever stood to me. "Livy, just give her what she wants, please. It's easier. 14 years. And those were the first words. I sat up in the dark with my hand pressed flat on the quilt and asked him the question I'd been saving since I was 18. "Easier for who, Dad?" The breathing went on a second longer. Then the line clicked soft like a door pulled to, not slammed. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling and thought, he called me from the garage, whispering, and some old stupid hope in me filled that with love. Remember that hope? It has one more scene in this story. December did its best to break me, and it came closer than I like admitting. The legal bills crossed $11,000. Retainer long gone. Invoices arriving with the Christmas cards. Ellie's pendants had already cost me hard money. I'd been 3 weeks from refinancing into a rate that would have saved me $240 a month, and the flag on my title killed it at the bank like a hand over a candle. A second client left, kind about it, gone anyway. Rachel counterpunched by bullying 2 bakery suppliers into sending me their books, which is the only reason my own lights stayed on. And if you ever wonder what family actually is, it's that. And one night at the kitchen table where all the big damage in this story keeps happening, I did what I do for a living. I ran the numbers on my own mother. 2 columns on a yellow pad. Column 1, settle. Krebs had floated a number through Dana, $40,000, and the lawsuit disappeared. List pendants released. Everybody goes back to their corners. Roof fund gone. Emergency fund gone. A loan against the business probably, but over in 60 days. Column 2, fight. Dana believed we'd win on the law. Believed it like a carpenter believes in a level. But the honest math said months more, thousands more, no guarantee. And my mother's appetite for siege already proven across 4 decades. I sat there for a long time with the pen. Then I looked at the banker's box by the door with her maiden math inside it, and I realized something with my whole body. $40,000 wouldn't buy an ending. It would buy a receipt with my signature on it, proof at last that the raising balance was real. Every dollar would teach her how the ledger worked. I drew a line through column 1. In the morning, Dana called before I'd finished my coffee. "Discovery's closed," she said, "and there's nothing in it but that notebook and hurt feelings. It's time to ask the court to end this. Motion for summary judgment. I'm filing tomorrow. Friend, sitting where I sat with the yellow pad and the cold coffee, which column would you have picked? Be honest in the comments, because I know plenty of good women who'd have paid the 40 just for quiet. And I'll never judge one of them. And if you're still with me, subscribe, because what the judge did with my mother's green notebook is the part I'd have driven through snow to see. Dana explained our motion the way she explained everything, like a woman assembling a shotgun on a clean towel. 3 blades, she said. First, the money was never theirs. A payable on death account is a legal transfer. Complete the moment June signed the designation. Direct personal probate never touches it. We had the bank officer's affidavit. June came in alone, sharp, deliberate, 2 years before she passed, and confirmed her wishes twice. Second, the statute of frauds. In Ohio, a promise about an interest in land is only enforceable in writing. And there was no writing because there was no promise. Just a story about one told by the only person who profited from telling it. Third, unjust enrichment requires that the plaintiff confer a benefit on the defendant. My mother never put a dollar, a nail, or an hour into Marald Lane. What she conferred, Dana said dryly, was a childhood invoiced at market rate. And there's no cause of action for charging your kid rent and regretting the pricing. While she assembled exhibits, she asked for June's bank paperwork, and that's when I finally opened the envelope. It had come with the pod documents 5 years earlier, marked in June's arthritis, crooked cursive for Olivia, when Carol finds you. When, not if. I had filed it unopened because some mail you have to be strong enough for. Inside was a single note card. It was never your debt, June Bug. It was mine. Don't pay it twice. I sat in Dana's parking lot and read it until the words stopped swimming. My grandmother had watched the ledger being written and known exactly where it came from. All the way back, mother to mother to mother. The hearing was set for the 2nd week of January. Both parties were ordered to appear. The courtroom in Wardell County smells like radiator dust and old varnish. And Judge Callahan ran it like a man with snow in his driveway and no patience for theatre. He took Krebs first. Show me the writing, counselor. There was no writing. Show me the benefit your client conferred on this specific property. Krebs performed a long sentence about family resources and the totality of sacrifice, and Callahan let it die of natural causes in the open air. Then the judge did the thing I will be describing to somebody for the rest of my life. He picked up Exhibit A, my mother's green notebook, submitted by her own attorney as proof of the family lending pattern. He turned pages with one finger unhurried, the whole room quiet enough to hear the paper. He stopped. He read one line to himself. Then he read it out loud slowly into the record. Room and board aged 14 collected. He looked up, not at Krebs, at my mother. Ma'am, this entry is in your handwriting. And my mother, I want you to understand that she was not ashamed. That shame was never once in the building with her. Sat up straighter and said, "Yes, Your Honor. I've always kept fair books." She asked to say something, and Callahan, God knows why, gave her a minute, and she used it to politely say the quiet part. Families keep accounts, Your Honor. Children are an investment like anything else. I'm not asking for charity. I'm only collecting what I'm owed. The radiator ticked. Somewhere behind me, a stranger exhaled low like they'd been hit. Callahan looked at her for a long moment, and then he said evenly, "Ma'am, that may be the saddest sentence anyone has said in my courtroom." He gathered the papers. "Decision by written entry," he said. The court adjourned. My mother smiled at Krebs like it had gone well. The entry came down 8 days later. Summary judgment for the defendant on all 3 counts. The court found no writing, no promise, no benefit conferred, and noted in a footnote, "I've read more times than I'll admit that the plaintiff's own exhibit documented not loans, but the systematic monetization of a minor child." Liz Pendant's ordered released. The house was mine again all the way through, due to the roofline. Rachel brought over a cake with a house drawn on it in frosting, and I ate a slice and surprised us both by crying into it, which she pretended not to see, which is why she's Rachel. Then Dana called with the next thing, because there's always the next thing. She wanted to file a motion for sanctions, frivolous conduct it's called. The suit had no basis in law, and Krebs knew it, or should have. Ohio lets the court make the plaintiff pay the defendant's attorney fees for exactly this. My whole body flinched. I'd just spent a year being collected on, and now I'd be the one holding out a bill. To my own mother, I heard myself say, "I don't want to become her." Dana, who bills by the 10th of an hour and doesn't spend words, said this. Olivia, she burned more than $14,000 of your money using the courthouse as a weapon. Asking the court to hand it back isn't keeping a ledger. It's putting out a fire. You are allowed to not pay for your own mugging. I thought about the roof fund, the dead refinance, the client who apologized while he left. I explained how to file it. Actual costs, not $1 more. That night, Sharon texted for the first time in weeks. Your mother says this isn't over. She'll appeal to her last breath. The sanctions hearing landed in the last week of February, and my mother arrived alone. Krebs had moved to withdraw 2 weeks earlier. His bills, it turned out, weren't getting paid either. And there is a kind of poetry that I'm still not big enough to enjoy properly. She represented herself. She'd brought a fresh folder, thicker, with new typed pages. And when the judge asked why she'd pursued claims with no legal basis, she stood and presented what she genuinely believed was her case. The sacrifices, the ingratitude, the raising balance, arithmetic she'd carried. For so long it had worn grooves in her. Callahan let her go longer than he had to. And I watched him understand in real time that he wasn't looking at a schemer. He was looking at true belief, which is worse. He cut her off midstream kindly, the way you'd take keys from a drunk friend, and ruled, frivolous conduct. Judgment against the plaintiff for the defendant's reasonable attorney fees, $14,500. And my mother turned around, right there, before the gavel noise had even settled and addressed the gallery. 3 retirees and a man waiting on a zoning case like they were the family assembled at Thanksgiving. Do you see? She said, and her voice was pure wonder, pure injury. Do you all see what she is? She's charging her own mother. The zoning man studied his boots. I sat very still while the room drained, that sentence ringing in me like a struck pipe because she meant it. In whatever country my mother lives in, the victim is always her, the books are always fair, and I am forever the debtor who ran. I thought the courthouse part of my life ended in that hallway. It didn't, it just changed floors. Here is everything I remember about the next 11 minutes, because I have been asked to remember them under oath, and the details do not move anymore. It was noon, late February, hard blue sky. The courthouse steps had been salted that morning, white crumbs crunching underfoot, and the stone railing wore a sleeve of old ice on its north side. Dana had gone back inside for her gloves. I stood on the 3rd step from the bottom, coat open. The cold felt clean after that courtroom, like rinsing a glass. Across the lot, I saw the blue truck and my father beside it in the brown coat. He's owned it since I was in middle school, and my mother is close to him, talking up into his face. She wasn't loud. That's what people get wrong about dangerous voices. The wind carried it to me in pieces the way wind does, and the pieces were these. She took everything from us, Ray. Everything we had, everything we were owed. And you just stand there, and you have always just stood there. I watched my father's shoulders climb toward his ears, and his head go down, and his hands open and close at his sides, like something was being pumped into him, a squeeze at a time. Then he came across the parking lot, not running, walking, fast, wrong, a man late for something. Boots hitting the salt in a rhythm I still hear in stairwells sometimes. I did not understand. That's the truth, and I've stopped apologizing for it. My father had never raised a hand to anyone in his life. He was the weather in our house, never the storm. I believe that right up until he was 3 steps away, and I saw that he was crying and that his hands were already reaching. He got me by the shoulders. My father, 61 years old, 40 years of torque wrenches in his grip, took my shoulders and shook me the way you'd shake a vending machine that ate your last dollar. And the voice that came out of him was one I had never heard in my life. A voice with rust and tears and 40 years of swallowing everything in it, roaring, "Give it back. Give it back, Libby. Just give her." And then the world went sideways. Maybe he threw me. Maybe he lost his footing on the salt with his hand still full of my coat. The prosecutor would say, "It doesn't matter." And the law agreed. I went into the stone railing hip first, got my right hand down to catch myself, and felt the wrist go wrong on the ice-licked edge. A deep, ugly structural pain like a drawer forced off its rails. My elbow split on the stone. My lip caught the corner coming down, then salt cold sky. People say time slows. Mine didn't. It skipped like a scratched disc. I was on the ground and there were already boots and radios because we were 20 feet from a courthouse security door and 2 deputies had watched the whole thing through the glass. They had my father face down in the salt in seconds and he didn't fight them at all. He went soft like the string holding him up had finally been cut. And my mother, I want this part in the record of my life. My mother stood in the middle of that parking lot, 20 feet from her bleeding daughter, and she did not come to me. She shouted at the deputies. That's my daughter. That is a family matter. This is none of your business. Family matters. I sat on the frozen steps, tasting pennies, watching my blood find spaces between the salt crystals, thinking with a calm that frightened me more than the pain. There it is. That's the whole religion right there. Then a deputy crouched into my eye line and asked the question that would split my life in half. Ma'am, you'll need to tell us whether you want to press charges. The emergency room did its patient arithmetic. Severe wrist sprain, splint and brace for 6 weeks. 3 stitches in the elbow, a lip that made me look like I'd lost a bar fight. Photographs of all of it, taken by a nurse with gentle hands and a flat cop voice. Left side, right side, ruler for scale. My father spent the night in a cell and was charged with assault, a first-degree misdemeanor in Ohio, the deputy explained. Since it was witnessed by 2 officers and a security camera with an opinion of its own, Rachel picked me up, drove me home, and slept on my couch without being asked. And the next evening, she drove me back into town, because there were 2 pieces of paper that could not wait for my wrist. The first was a petition for a domestic violence civil protection order. I qualified, the advocate explained, because Ohio's definition covers a parent you've lived with, no matter how long ago the living stopped. I filled it out left-handed, printing like a first grader, 18 years in one house, condensed to the lines provided. The judge granted the temporary order the same day, with a full hearing set for the following week. The second paper was for the prosecutor, Mr. Boyd, a tired, decent man with reading glasses on a chain. He told me the case was solid with or without me, but juries and judges hear daughters differently than they hear camera footage. He slid the witness form across the desk and said, "No pressure tonight, take it home." I signed it at his desk. There are signatures that change your name without changing a letter of it. I walked in as their daughter. I walked out as the state's witness, and I realized in the parking lot under the sodium lights with my arm in a brace that there was no walking back ever. It was the loneliest I have felt in my life, and it was still somehow the first week of my life. The voicemail came 4 days after the courthouse steps, while my father sat out on bond with a no-contact order, and I'd later learn of a cot in Sharon's sewing room. It was my mother, and the warmth was back. The full bank teller sunrise, as if that morning on the courthouse steps had been a misunderstanding between strangers. "Libby, sweetheart, your father is sick over what happened. You know he'd never hurt you. He tripped. Everyone could see it, but the county needs its little victories. Here's what we're going to do as a family. You'll tell the prosecutor you won't testify. You'll withdraw that awful order which is humiliating your father in front of the whole church, and you'll let the fee business go. We'll call it even on everything, and then you'll come home for Sunday dinner. I'll make the roast. All of it is forgiven. Honey, all of it. You'll have your family again." I stood at my kitchen counter in the dark and played it 3 times. I want to be honest with you because a story like mine is worthless if I lie to you in the last act. That voicemail worked on me, not the logic, the roast, the word home in her mouth, the exact pitch of it, tuned by 32 years of my wanting it. I had a brace on my wrist, stitches in my elbow, and some 10-year-old under my sternum whispering. She said, "Forgiven, we could just be done." That's the trick of it, friends. The forgiveness on offer was a product, and the price tag was everything true that had ever happened. I walked to the windowsill and picked up June's teacup with my good hand, and I took her note out of the drawer and read it again, the crooked cursive holding steady. "It was never your debt, Junebug. Don't pay it twice. I saved the voicemail into the case file, not for evidence, so I would never again wonder what her forgiveness retails for." The protection order hearing came first. I sat at a small table with a victim's advocate, raised my right hand awkwardly because of the brace, and told a magistrate about the ledger, the Friday envelopes, the 14 years of being watched like an account, the steps, the railing, the salt. My father's court-appointed lawyer asked careful questions. My father himself never looked up from his hands. 5 years, the magistrate wrote. No contact, no third-party messages, 500 feet. It should have felt like winning. It felt like signing a death certificate for something that had technically died years ago. 6 weeks later came the trial for the assault itself. A bench trial in the municipal court. One judge, no jury, my mother in the second row in her church with her tissue. Boyd built it like a man laying brick. The deputies, the footage, the ER doctor with my x-rays and photographs. Then me, the defense lawyer, did his job. I don't hate him for it. Isn't it true you'd just made a judgment against his wife that morning? Isn't it true there's money involved that you'd won? Isn't this order, this prosecution, this whole performance just the last chapter of getting even? And here is where something happened that I didn't plan and couldn't have. I looked down the way you do when a question stings, and I saw the exhibits stacked at the prosecution table. My folders, my labels, my typed tabs, 14 years of receipts, and I finally saw them. Not caution, not a bookkeeper's habit, a daughter's savings account of proof, decades of deposits. All of it waiting for a day when the evidence would finally total enough to purchase what other children got free. I had been keeping her ledger all along from the other side. We're not asking, we're collecting. She'd set it on my porch, and I'd been collecting too, just in a different currency. And the account was never ever going to fill. So I looked up and answered him, and my voice came out level. No, sir, it isn't revenge. It's the first true thing this family has ever put in writing. The defense called one witness, my mother. I think the lawyer regretted it inside of a minute. She began composing. Wife of 40 years. He's gentle, he stumbled, the salt, the ice. But composure was never the load-bearing wall in my mother. The ledger was, and Boyd only had to stand near it. On cross, he asked softly whether she'd told her husband that morning that I had taken everything from them. She straightened. Well, hadn't I? He asked whether she understood the civil case was over, that a judge had ruled the money was mine, the house was mine, that there was no debt, and my mother came apart. Not the way glass does, the way a dam does. One scene first, and then everything at once in front of the flag and the docket and the whole indifferent machinery of the county. It's not over, she said, and her voice cracked out of its Sunday register. It will not be over until she pays what she owes. I gave that girl everything. And she turned in the witness box, past the lawyers, past the judge's warning, and found my face. And for the first time in my whole life, my mother spoke to me without any sweetness at all, which I suppose means honestly. After everything I put into you, after everything I paid, the judge was saying, ma'am, and the gavel went. And the courtroom did its shocking quiet thing. And into that quiet, the judge, done, said the defendant was found guilty, and asked before sentencing whether the victim wished to make a statement. I stood up with my arm in its brace. My mother was still in the box, 10 feet away, breathing hard. And my father sat at the defense table with his head down, smaller than I'd ever seen him. And friends, everything I might have said, 14 years of it, the whole banker's box of it reduced the way source reduces down to what was actually true. And it was almost nothing. And it was everything. I answered I wasn't there to collect. I answered I'd been paying on an invented debt since I was 14 years old and I was done. And being done was not the same as getting even. Then I studied her face. Only her. Love isn't alone, Mum. I answered it once. I answered it quietly. She flinched like I'd raised my hand to her. The first honest flinch I ever saw on her face. Then I asked the judge for the thing neither of my parents will ever understand was mercy. No jail, counseling, probation, whatever teaches a man where his own hands end. The sentence came down 180 days suspended. 1 year of probation, anger management, no contact, the protection order standing. The gavel fell. My father mouthed something at the table. It might have been Libby. It might have been a pity. He didn't finish it, whatever it was. And I walked past the second row on my way out. And my mother turned her face away from me, and it didn't take anything from me on its way past. That was new. That was the whole war right there ending in a coat aisle in municipal court. Her silence finally arrived at an address where it couldn't charge interest. The hallway outside the courtroom had wooden benches worn pale, and on one of them sat my cousin Danny, Sharon's boy, 19, in a tie he clearly did not own until that week. He stood up too fast when he saw me, the way tall boys do. all elbows and apology. "I didn't tell my mom I was coming," he said. Somebody from the family should be here for you, on your side of the hall." I'd like to tell you I answered something graceful, but what I actually did was hug a teenager in a courthouse hallway with my one good arm until he patted my back like he was burping me. Through the window in the stairwell door, I could see my father on the landing below with his probation officer nodding at a clipboard, learning the schedule of his new accountability. "Just give her what she wants, Libby. It's easier." 40 years he'd paid his own toll on that road, and it had finally carried him here to a clipboard, to a court-ordered class, to a daughter he can't come within 500 feet of. Easier for who, Dad? I didn't say it to him. There'd be no more saying things to him. That door had a court order on it now, and the strange grief of that will visit me on Father's Days for the rest of my life. And I've made peace with the visits. Instead, I turned to the kid in the bad tie who'd driven 2 hours to sit on the right bench. "Are you hungry? There's a diner across the square that does pancakes all day. My treat. And Danny, hear me on this because it's the family motto now from your generation forward. Nobody's writing it down. Spring came the way it does in Ohio. Mud first, then all at once. The fee judgment got paid in pieces. Dana's office handled the collecting, and I stayed out of the middle of it, and every dollar went where it belonged. First, the balance I still owed her firm. Then back into the accounts this year had emptied, and I kept not 1 cent past my actual costs, because there was never going to be a version of me that charged that woman interest. The refinance closed in April, the title clean, the payment lighter, the roof fund slowly refilling like a well after rain. My mother never managed her appeal. 2 attorneys declined the case, and the deadline did what deadlines do. She and my father moved into an apartment in Marion, and by all accounts she tells the story her way at every table that will still seat her. The daughter who stole an inheritance, bought a fine house with it, and then charged her own mother for the privilege of being sued. Sharon still sends letters, real paper, real stamps. Family is forever, Libby. Your mother is getting older. The door is always open. I don't answer them. And I need you to understand it's not rage because I'm not angry at Sharon. And honestly, most days, not even at Carol, it's simpler than anger. That account is closed. You can't make a deposit at a bank that's been demolished. No matter how sincere the check, the Marigolds came back on their own that year. 4th spring. Volunteers from last season's seed, which the garden ladies tell me is just what Marolds do if you leave the bed alone. And on Sundays, more often than not, there's a grey primer hatchback in my driveway and a tall kid at my kitchen table, eating everything that isn't nailed down while I walk him through his financial aid forms, line by line for free forever. First one in the family to go, Danny says. Second, I tell him, I just took the long way. There was 1 piece of housekeeping left, and I did it on an ordinary Tuesday. No candles, no ceremony. I took the banker's box down from the closet. Sinclair v. Sinclair in my own block letters, and I sorted it one last time. The closing file, the tax returns, the bank statements, back on the shelf where working papers belong, papers for living. June's note card went into the drawer with my passport, which is where I keep the things that prove who I am, and the Brick of Friday envelope receipts, $40 a week in my mother's flawless hand, age 14 to age 18. I held it for a minute, and I want to tell you, I sensed something enormous. But the truth is kinder than that. It felt like holding a stranger's utility bill, expired paper from a closed account. I dropped it in the recycling bin with the junk mail and the seed catalogues, rolled the bin to the curb, and made tea in June's cup while the truck came and went. That night, I wrote the last line in my own notebook. And I should tell you about my notebook, because I did finally start one. It's not a ledger. It's a cheap garden journal with a bee on the cover, and there is not one sign in it anywhere. In April I wrote, Marigolds came back on their own. Then I sat in my quiet kitchen, in my quiet house, in the life I was told I could never afford, and I noticed the silence had changed temperature. It used to be held breath. Now it was just evening. Nobody was coming to collect anything, and everything in the house, including the woman in it, was finally fully paid for. So here is the one thing I know. The whole estate I have to leave you. If someone hands you a bill for loving you, you don't owe the balance. You owe yourself the door, because love that keeps a ledger was never love at all. It was layaway. That's my story. one green ledger, one banker's box, and a mother who is still waiting to be paid for a debt I never owed. If this story reminded you that you're allowed to stop paying, take that as your sign. Share this with someone who still keeps the receipts of their childhood. Drop a comment. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.